The grand hall of the Verelian summit shimmered with light as leaders from across the galaxy gathered under the towering crystal domes of the moon Verelia, a place chosen for peace far from war and borders. Rows of alien dignitaries stood in a half-circle around Queen Virexa of the Thal-Nari Dominion, a tall, elegant figure with silver scales and luminous green eyes, her presence calm yet commanding, while beside her stood Captain Elias Terran, a human soldier wearing a faded Earth Federation uniform, assigned as an honorary guard, not for war, but for appearance. At least, that's what they thought until the moment the air shifted, subtly at first, and Elias, trained by years of instinct and survival, noticed a strange movement in the rafters, too fast, too precise to be innocent, and then time seemed to freeze as the glint of a sniper's rifle reflected against a shard of glass high above the audience, and without a thought, Elias lunged forward just as a searing blue plasma bolt tore through the air, heading straight for the Queen, his body colliding with hers, shoving her aside as the bolt struck him square in the chest, burning through his armor and flash of light and pain, and the hall erupted in panic, screams echoing off the crystal walls as guards rushed in every direction, while Elias collapsed to the floor, gasping, vision fading, pain radiating through his body, and above him stood Queen Virexa, stunned, reaching for him with trembling hands, her people's sacred seal, a glowing mark appearing on her throat. Something no outsider had seen in generations, for the life-debt bond had been activated, and her people's ancient tradition now tied her fate to the dying human before her, as her advisors shouted, demanding protection, fearing the Queen might be next, but she refused to leave Elias's side, kneeling beside him, her hands glowing with a faint green energy as she tried to stabilize him, whispering strange words that Elias could barely hear, his vision darkening, pain numbing, his mind slipping into unconsciousness. And in that final moment before blackness took him, he saw her face, not a queen, not a ruler, but someone terrified and bound by something deeper than duty. And then silence claimed him as the security lockdown sealed the chamber and the stars outside burned on, unaware that one soldier's instinct had changed the course of history. Elias Terran woke to silence, but not the cold, sterile kind he expected from a human med bay. This silence was deep and strange, like the quiet in a vast underwater cave, broken only by the soft hum of unknown machines and the faint pulse of glowing light from the ceiling above. And as his eyes slowly opened, blurry and heavy, he realized he wasn't on any Earth ship or base he recognized, because the walls were smooth like metal, yet shimmered like stone, and the air smelled faintly of something sweet and alien, something like flowers that had never grown on Earth. His body ached, wrapped in a soft cocoon of light that buzzed gently around his chest where the plasma bolt had struck, and as he shifted slightly, he heard soft footsteps approaching, graceful and light, and then she appeared, Queen Virexa. No crown, no guards, no throne, just her tall form in a flowing silver robe, her eyes glowing dimly with what he couldn't tell was worry or curiosity. And when she spoke, her voice was softer than before, not the firm tone of a ruler, but something more personal, almost gentle, and she said, "You are awake, Captain Terran," and he blinked. Surprised, she knew his full name, trying to sit up but failing as pain shot through his chest. and she moved quickly to press a hand toward his shoulder, stopping him without force, but with strange energy that made his limbs relax, and he asked, groggy, Where am I?" And she answered, "You are aboard the Serenity Flame, a healing vessel of my people," and added after a pause, "You saved my life, and in doing so you have triggered the rite of Vashara." And he frowned, trying to understand his mind, still slow, asking, "The what?" And then she turned slightly, revealing the glowing green mark on her throat, shaped like a curved flame. And when Elias saw it, something deep inside told him it was important, even if he didn't know why. And she explained, "It is our life-debt seal. It means I am bound to you until your life is fully repaid." And he stared at her, confused and shocked, not sure if it was a joke or a cultural misunderstanding, but she was serious, and her people took these rites seriously too, and before he could say more, 2 tall Thalanari guards entered, followed by a group of robed figures with long necks and glowing palms, and one of them spoke in a melodic tone, addressing the queen and Elias both, saying, "The bond has been confirmed," and they discussed rituals, duties, and laws Elias didn't understand while he sat there, still recovering, realizing that by saving the queen, he had not only changed her fate, but also his own, because Thalanari law said she must now serve him, not as a slave or servant, but as a protector and life companion until the debt was fulfilled, and it could not be rejected or reversed without insulting her entire civilization and possibly triggering interstellar insult or even war. And when Elias tried to object, saying he didn't want a life debt, that he had just done what anyone would have done, she calmly replied, "No one else did, and that hit him harder than the plasma shot." Because she was right, no one else had moved, no one else had stood in the path of death, only him, and now everything had changed. Days passed as he healed, walking slowly through the glowing halls of the ship, always accompanied by Thalanari guards who watched him with a mix of respect and curiosity, whispering in their musical language whenever he passed, and he learned. The ship was headed to Thalanar Prime, their home world, where the rite would be completed in front of the ruling circle, and though he wanted to return to Earth, he was told politely but firmly that leaving before the ritual was done would dishonor the queen and possibly cause a political scandal. And so Elias, a soldier who had wanted nothing but a quiet assignment, now found himself the center of a galactic tradition he barely understood, with the queen bound to him and thousands of eyes waiting to see what would happen next. When they reached orbit over Thalanar Prime, Elias saw a world like no other giant floating cities above shimmering blue oceans, tall white towers that curved like seashells, and living bridges made of glowing vines that stretched between cliffs. And from the moment he stepped down onto the royal platform, escorted by Virexa herself, crowds of Thalanari filled the airways and balconies, silent and watching, their eyes glowing softly, not with anger or disapproval, but with awe, as if witnessing something sacred. And the ceremony began in a temple made of crystal and song, where Elias stood beside the queen, while the high speaker recited the rite of the bound flame, speaking of courage, sacrifice, and the path of honor. And as the queen repeated the vow in her language, placing a hand over her heart, and then over Elias's, he felt something strange inside, not fear, but connection, something deep and ancient he couldn't explain. And when the ritual ended, The mark on her throat glowed brighter for a moment and then faded to a soft pulse. And the high speaker declared the bond is complete, and the crowd let out a strange harmonic breath, like wind moving through glass. And after it was done, Elias was taken to royal quarters overlooking the sea, where he tried to make sense of everything, wondering if he would ever go home, if Earth knew what had happened, if Command was looking for him, or if this would become part of some bigger plan. And while he stared at the alien sky, Virexa visited him again, not as a queen, but as someone who owed him everything. And she said, "This bond is not a burden, Captain. It is a gift among my people, and while it may seem strange to you, I will honor it fully." And Elias, tired and overwhelmed, nodded slowly, realizing that no matter what he felt, the entire galaxy was watching now, waiting to see what a human and a queen would do next, and somewhere far beyond the stars. In the shadows of space, others had already begun to move, for not everyone wished to see this bond succeed, and danger, quiet and cold, was already on its way. The days that followed on Thalanar Prime felt like both peace and pressure for Elias. Terran, the human soldier, now bound by a sacred life debt to Queen Virexa, and while the skies above the alien world remained calm, painted with glowing stars and drifting clouds, something beneath that calm surface stirred with tension, as if the whole planet was holding its breath. Elias spent his time adjusting to the strange customs of the Thalanari, their songs that were laws, their glowing crystal architecture that hummed softly at night, their strange language that pulsed with emotion even when translated. But he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, more than just by curious citizens or whispering nobles, but by something unseen, colder, darker. He tried to focus on learning, on understanding the bond that had changed his life, attending briefings and rituals with Virexa, who remained calm and strong in public, always poised, yet in private, sometimes let silence linger too long, as if troubled by thoughts she did not speak aloud. And one evening, as they stood on a high balcony overlooking the ocean cliffs, she told him, "Our enemies will not let this bond go unanswered." And though she didn't name them, Elias remembered the assassin from Virelia and the strange markings on the weapon, the way the bolt had been shaped to pierce royal armor. Not just kill, it had been meant to end a legacy, not a person. Later that night, he was awakened by an urgent voice from the temple guard, calling him to the queen's chamber, and when he arrived, she was already armored in ceremonial silver plating. Her eyes narrowed, and she handed him a scanner with intercepted transmissions encrypted, but the symbols were clear. They belonged to the Carrick hegemony, a ruthless empire known for expansion, manipulation, and using proxy forces to weaken their enemies from the inside. And now, it seemed, they were moving against the Thalanari, using the incident with Elias and the Queen's bond as a political excuse, calling it a corruption of bloodlines, and spreading rumors that Earth was secretly controlling the Dominion through Elias. This was more than insult, it was a strategy, an attempt to divide alliances and isolate the Thalanari from their allies, including Earth, and worse, Carrick ships had been spotted along the outer rim, near unclaimed space that bordered both Earth and Thalanari systems, which meant this wasn't just politics, it was preparation for something far worse. The Council of Elders gathered in haste, voices raised in harmonic tones that Elias could not fully follow, but their emotions were clear. Some wanted to recall all diplomatic ships. Others suggested strengthening defenses, and a few even whispered of war, while Elias stood beside Virexa, knowing his presence alone was already causing cracks in their unity. And yet, when she spoke, her voice cut through the noise like a blade, calm and steady. The bond was born in sacrifice, not strategy. We will not dishonor it for fear, and though many disagreed, none could challenge her directly, for to question the bond was to question the laws written in the songs of the ancestors. After the meeting, Elias walked with her in silence until he asked, "Do you regret it?" And she paused before answering, "I regret that my people are not yet strong enough to see honor without fear." And then she looked at him with a strange expression, one that held both respect and sorrow, and said, "But I do not regret you." Still the shadows grew, and the next day, while Elias trained in the royal grounds trying to stay sharp, though the Thalinari weapons felt strange in his hands, an explosion rocked the outer garden wall, and before the guards could respond, cloaked figures emerged from the smoke, fast and silent, not Thalinari, not human, but something else, hired killers with shifting armor and plasma blades, and Elias fought with instinct, grabbing the nearest staff weapon, blocking a strike meant for his head, countering with a sweep that knocked one attacker into the wall, while others closed in, but before they could overwhelm him, Virexa appeared from the high steps, moving like a storm, her blade glowing with a green fire Elias had never seen, slicing through attackers with precise grace, until the last one turned and ran, but not before dropping a strange metallic token that shimmered with the mark of the Karuk. The message was clear: Elias wasn't just a target of political insult. He was now a threat to be removed, and they wouldn't stop with one attempt. Security was tightened, guards doubled, routes changed, but even so, whispers of assassination spread, and tensions among the nobility grew, some fearing that Elias's presence was inviting danger, others arguing that abandoning him would make them look weak. And in the middle of it all, Elias felt the weight of it pressing on his shoulders, heavier than any combat mission he'd ever taken, because this time it wasn't just his life. On the line it was a queen, a world, a peace he didn't even know how to keep. Yet he couldn't walk away, not now, not with the bond glowing faintly beneath Virex's throat like a reminder, not after he'd seen how close they'd come to losing everything. And so, late one night, he asked her to teach him not just how to use the weapons, but how to understand her people's way of seeing the world, their songs of honor, their silent codes, their belief that sacrifice bound souls beyond words. And she agreed, and each day they trained together, not just in combat, but in meaning. And as he learned, the bond between them grew deeper, not romantic, not spoken, but forged in fire, and soon he moved like one of them, thought like one of them, and the guards who once doubted him now nodded with respect. But while they prepared, the storm was already building beyond the stars, and one night a report came from a deep scout drone. An Earth diplomatic vessel had been ambushed near the Karak border, its crew missing, presumed captured, and the Federation demanded answers, calling for a summit, one final attempt at peace, to be held at Helios Spire, the great station city between the stars, neutral ground for all major powers. And Virexa, bound by duty and law, had to attend, and so did Elias, not just as her protector, but as the living proof of the bond that had sparked all this chaos. They both knew the risks another attack was likely, trust would be thin, and the hegemony would try to twist every word. But there was no choice, not if they wanted to stop war before it began. And as the Serenity flame changed course toward Helios' spire, slicing through the silent dark of space, Elias stood at the viewing port, watching the stars drift by like ghosts, and whispered to himself, "Chains or not, I'll see this through." And far behind them, in the cold vacuum beyond the rim, ships without flags gathered in silence, engines dark, weapons primed, waiting for the moment to strike. The Helios spire floated in the darkness like a blade of silver light, balanced between stars and shadow, its many towers reaching in every direction, each one a symbol of peace. Yet now, surrounded by ships of war from every major power in the galaxy, as the summit approached with tension so thick it could almost be felt in the air. Inside the station, the halls were full of security drones, diplomats in bright robes, and guards. From every world, each side eyeing the others with thinly veiled suspicion. While Queen Virexa walked silently through it all, tall and composed in her royal armor, flanked by her advisors and Thalanari elite guards, and just behind her walked Elias Terran, wearing a sleek black uniform gifted by the Thalanari butt, with his Earth Federation badge still on his shoulder, a reminder of who he was and what he had become. And though many turned to watch them pass, some with awe, others with distrust, Elias kept his focus sharp, eyes scanning corners, noting movement, counting exits, because beneath all the glitter and peace talks, something felt wrong. Virexa's voice was calm as they approached the central summit chamber, but Elias noticed the tension in her hand as it brushed the hilt of her ceremonial blade, and when she glanced at him, just for a second, he saw a flicker of concern behind her eyes. She felt it too, that sense of danger not yet revealed. Inside the chamber, leaders took their places at the great table made of starlight-infused crystal, with the high speaker of the spire presiding in the center, his voice low and smooth, welcoming all, urging peace, balance, reason. And yet the room was cold, not just from the metal walls, but from the silence between rivals. As the Karak hegemony's ambassador arrived late, his armor dark and sharp, his words dripping with false politeness as he spoke of destabilizing rituals and foreign interference. And when he looked directly at Elias, he smiled a slow, dangerous smile and said, "Some traditions are better left buried," which stirred a low growl from the Thalanari side, but Virexa raised her hand, keeping the peace for now. The hours passed in talks that felt more like traps, with every offer twisted, every word carefully chosen to spark doubt or offense, until finally a break was called, and Elias followed Virexa to a quiet chamber off the main hall, where she dropped her mask for just a moment, exhaling slowly and whispering, "They do not want peace, they want a stage." And Elias nodded, replying, "Then let's not give them a show they can control." But before they could speak further, the lights flickered, and Elias's hand went to his weapon instantly, the soldier in him rising fast, and a second later, a deafening alarm blared through the spire, followed by a station-wide lockdown, and the voice of the spire's AI announcing, "Containment breach in core-level unauthorized forces detected." And in that instant, chaos erupted. Explosions rocked the lower decks, and through a nearby display, Elias saw them troops in cloaking armor, not wearing Karak colors, but unmistakably trained in their tactics, storming key sectors of the station, targeting power systems and the summit chamber itself. And it became clear they weren't here to fight a war. They were here to end the summit by force and assassinate whoever stood in the way. Without waiting, Elias and Virexa moved as one, their guards fanning out, weapons drawn, pushing through crowded corridors filled with panicked staff and malfunctioning drones, heading for the central tower where the ambassadors were trapped. And along the way, they were attacked first by drones hacked from within, then by mercenaries with silent rifles. But Elias moved fast, precise, his training kicking in fully, while Virexa fought like light itself, her blade moving with elegant fury, and together they cut a path through the smoke and fire toward the summit chamber. When they reached the sealed doors, they found them guarded by enemy troops already inside, preparing to breach from within, and without hesitation, Elias threw an EMP grenade, shorting their visors just long enough for Virexa to strike, and in moments the chamber was secured, the ambassadors staring in stunned silence at the queen and her human shield, now bloodied but unbroken. The Carrick ambassador was nowhere to be found, already evacuated by hidden escape pods, which only confirmed his guilt. And as the Spire's systems rebooted, the surviving delegates turned their eyes to Virexa, who stood at the center of the room and said, "This was not a war of our choosing, but it will not be a war we run from." And then she looked to Elias and added, "He is not a symbol of control, he is the proof of honor." And in that moment, something changed, not fully, not suddenly, but enough that the room fell silent in respect, not politics. And when emergency crews arrived and security finally restored order, news of what had happened spread across the stars. The queen and the soldier had stood together against assassins and sabotage, defending not just each other, but the fragile peace so many wanted to destroy. Back aboard the Serenity Flame, orbiting once more above the stars, Elias sat quietly in the observation bay, bruised and tired, staring into the darkness, thinking about how far things had come, how much still hung in balance. And when Virexa joined him, neither spoke for a while, until she said, "They will come again, stronger next time," and Elias answered, "Then we hold the line again," and she smiled. Not the formal kind she wore in court, but something real, and said, "Sword and shield," and he replied, "Queen and soldier," and the stars above them blinked softly, as if listening, as if waiting for the next move in a game that had only just begun. The storm came faster than anyone expected, and though the summit at Helios Spire had survived the first blow, it had only bought time, not peace, because in the days that followed, whispers turned into warnings, and warnings turned into war, with the Carrick hegemony launching surprise attacks on neutral worlds under the pretense of defensive action, while mercenary fleets bearing no flags struck trading routes and communication hubs, plunging sectors into silence. And though no official declaration was made, it became clear to all that the Convocation War had begun a conflict, not bound by open battles, but by manipulation, sabotage, and the slow tearing apart of the alliances that had once held the galaxy together. Elias Tiarn knew it the moment he saw the first casualty report from Earth's outer colonies, where scout stations had gone dark without a trace, and ships full of settlers vanished from long-range scans, while Queen Virexa watched her own worlds falter under mounting pressure, not from attacks, but from fear seated carefully by the Karake agents, who now stirred old rivalries among the Thalanari clans, whispering that the Queen's bond to a human had invited doom, that the bond itself was cursed, unnatural, a sign of weakness, and though many still stood by her, the circle of trust had shrunk, and the palace halls grew colder with every passing day. Elias remained by her side, training daily, coordinating with Earth's fleet intelligence, watching movements along the borders, but even he could feel the cracks forming, not just in politics but in people's hearts. And when he and Virexa sat alone one evening beneath the crystal trees of the upper terrace, she spoke softly, as if afraid the stars might overhear. "They do not see the enemy because they are busy fearing me." And Elias didn't try to offer false comfort. Instead, he nodded and replied, "Then let them see what you're willing to fight for." And those words stayed with her, echoing days later when the call came from the deep frontier, the planet Corvallis Prime, once neutral, now burning, its skies filled with Carrick ships, its leaders begging for help. And though it lay far from Thalanari territory, Virexa made the choice without pause, sending her fleet forward, not just as aid, but as a message, and Elias went with them, commanding a squad of mixed troops, Thalanari warriors and human marines, fighting side by side, something new, something dangerous to the enemy's plans. The battle for Corvallis was brutal, fought across cities made of glass and stone, where every rooftop hid snipers and every tower shook with explosions, and Elias found himself at the front, leading charge after charge through debris and smoke, his voice steady over combs, rallying soldiers who had never trained together, but now bled for the same cause, while above them, Thalanari ships danced with Carrick warcraft in the sky, leaving burning trails of light across the clouds. During a key push toward the command spire, Elias's unit was pinned by heavy fire, and he thought it might be the end until Virexa herself arrived, leading her royal guard in a flanking maneuver that turned the tide. And for a moment, amidst all the chaos, the Queen and the soldier stood back to back again, blades and rifles in sync, and even the Carrick troops seemed shaken by the sight before retreating in scattered panic. They won the battle, but not without cost hundreds dead, more wounded, and though the flames were put out, the war only spread like oil across the stars, because in saving Corvallis, Virexa had proven she would act beyond her borders, and now other worlds called for her aid, while the Carrick grew bolder, launching coordinated strikes against Earth convoys and planting false reports across the galactic net, claiming that the Thalanari were trying to build an empire of their own with a human puppet as their blade. The lie worked better than anyone expected, and suddenly Earth found itself questioned by former allies, and Thalanari ambassadors were denied access in once friendly systems. And yet through all of this, Virexa refused to break, standing firm with Elias as her right hand, rebuilding trust step by painful step, sending missions of mercy alongside warships, holding councils by hologram with wary allies, trying to keep the flames from becoming a firestorm. But even as they worked, they knew something darker was coming, a Carrick fleet gathering near the Unbound sector, a place where no law held, only old runes and ancient silence. And when a scout drone returned with images of massive ships, energy readings off the scale, Elias and Virexa both understood. The Carrick weren't trying to win hearts. They were building something final, something meant to end resistance in a single blow. And so they acted, quickly and in secret, gathering what forces they could trust, calling in favors, reaching out to captains who owed debts, to warriors who still believed in the bond between worlds. And together they formed a new force, unofficial, unrecognized, but real, and they called it the Convocation Shield, a fleet that would strike not to conquer, but to protect what was left of unity. Elias took command of the spear unit, flying aboard a sleek Thalinari warcraft called the Eclipse Wing, and Viraxa stayed aboard the command cruiser Starheart, her presence a signal to all watching that the Queen herself had taken the field. The mission was simple: reach the unbound sector, locate the correct dreadnought and stop it before it could move, but nothing went as planned, because the moment they entered the system they were ambushed, not just by correct forces, but by automated drones built from scavenged technology, weapons stitched from fallen ships, traps that turned space itself into a maze of fire, and within moments half the fleet was scattered, communications jammed, and the Eclipse Wing was hit, systems failing, spinning toward a dead moon, until Elias managed to stabilize the ship just before crashing, the impact shaking his bones, but leaving him alive. Cut off from the others, he made his way through the wreck, gathering supplies, calling out across all frequencies, and finally reaching one voice, Viraxa's faint but steady, telling him that the Starheart was still in orbit, holding position, but surrounded, unable to move, and that unless the jamming tower on the surface was destroyed, they would be sitting targets. Elias knew what he had to do, and he moved fast, trekking across the moon's surface with a small team of survivors, dodging drone patrols and mines until they reached the tower, a black spire glowing with pulsing red light protected by shielded turrets and a dozen Karak elite. It was suicide, but Elias didn't slow down. Instead, he drew in a breath, raised his rifle, and charged. And the fight that followed was chaos, raw and brutal, with no backup, no rescue, only grit and fury until Elias reached the core, planted the charge, and detonated the tower just as a blade struck his side, cutting deep but not killing. And he collapsed just as the signal cleared, and the stars came alive with returning voices, fleets regrouping, shields reactivating, and the Starheart breaking orbit with fury, striking back at the dreadnought before it could fire, its engines glowing with power as it drove into battle. And from above, Viraxa saw the flames rise and knew they had won the moment, but not the war. Medics found Elias minutes later, unconscious but alive, his armor broken, his blood on the floor, and when he opened his eyes aboard the Starheart, he found Viraxa there, watching over him, and she said softly, "You are not just a soldier anymore. You are the bond that holds us." And though he was too tired to speak, he nodded, because he understood now the war was far from over, but in this moment they had done more than fight. They had given the galaxy a reason to believe that the bond between queen and soldier, between sword and shield, could stand against anything, even a storm born from the stars. The fires of the Convocation War still burned across the galaxy, though the skies above the unbound sector had quieted after the final battle, and while the Thalinari Queen and her human soldier had halted the Karak's superweapon and sent its dreadnought tumbling into ruin, everyone knew the war wasn't over, not yet. And as Elias Terran lay recovering in the medical wing of the Starheart, his body still aching from the wounds of battle, The galaxy held its breath, unsure if peace would follow victory or if vengeance would rise again from the ashes. And though he hated lying in a bed while others made decisions, Elias listened carefully to every whisper that passed through the coms, every message coded and urgent, because even as diplomats praised their success in public, something darker was growing in the shadows. Queen Viraxa stood before the council of her warlords, her armor gleaming but her eyes heavy, and she spoke plainly, without flourish, telling them that the K'rek threat had been stopped but not broken, that their network still reached deep. And worse, that someone within the Thalanari royal circles had fed them information, had betrayed them during the Unbound assault. And when she said this, the silence that followed was thick, heavy with unspoken fear, because treason in the Queen's own court was unheard of, almost sacred in its taboo. And yet now that silence cracked like glass as she revealed encrypted records uncovered by Elias before his ship crashed, records that pointed to secret communications, hidden coordinates, and a trail that led not to the K'rek front, but deep into Thalanari territory toward one of their own outer temples, long thought abandoned. Elias, despite still limping, demanded to go with her when she set course for the temple, and she did not argue. She knew they had started this path together, and they would finish it together. And as the Starheart jumped through light and time, their thoughts raced ahead of them, trying to piece together who would do this, who would risk the end of the alliance just to see the Queen fall. And when they arrived, the temple looked lifeless at first, an ancient structure buried into the side of a silent moon, surrounded by dust storms and forgotten history. But as they approached on foot, with only a handful of elite guards, hidden turrets rose from the sand and opened fire without warning, and the Queen herself blocked a beam with her energy shield while Elias rolled into cover, returning fire with calm focus despite the pain in his ribs. And once the defenses were down, they entered the temple, moving slowly through the dark halls, where ancient Thalanari carvings glowed faintly on the walls, whispering stories of oaths and bonds, of loyalty and blood, until they reached the central chamber, and there, waiting for them, was Lord Scyther, once a trusted voice in the Queen's court, now armored in shadow-forged metal, his eyes cold, his voice proud as he confessed that he had betrayed them not out of hate, but out of belief that the Queen's bond with a human would poison their people's purity, that tradition mattered more than honor, and that by saving Elias she had doomed the old ways. So he had made a choice to preserve Thalanari's strength by destroying her symbol of change. Viraxa's fury was quiet, sharp as a blade, and she asked him only one question: is loyalty so weak that it fears difference? To which Scyther laughed and said, "No, my Queen, it's just strong enough to kill for." And then he attacked, striking with the speed of one who had trained beside her for years. And though her guards moved in, Elias shouted for them to stay back, knowing this wasn't a battle of soldiers, it was a battle of trust broken and trust defended. And Viraxa fought like a storm, her blade singing through air, her breath steady, her footwork perfect, while Scyther fought with rage and precision, their weapons sparking as they clashed again and again, until finally Elias saw an opening and took the shot, not to kill, but to distract, and it worked, giving Viraxa just enough time to disarm Scyther with a swift spin and bring him to his knees. She did not strike the final blow. Instead, she called for justice, binding him by ancient right. And though Scyther spat curses, even he knew the law, and with his capture, the truth came out. He had worked not only with the Carrick, but with certain rogue Thalinari clans, who believed that Elias represented a future where humans and aliens stood as equals, not rivals, and they had feared that future enough to start a war. As word spread across the stars that the traitor had been exposed, many who had doubted the Queen now returned to her cause, and Earth's leaders, once cautious, pledged renewed support, realizing that Elias had become more than a symbol. He was a bridge, a living proof that bonds formed in war could forge peace. In the weeks that followed, cleanup operations began, rebuilding shattered outposts, restoring broken communications. But the Queen and the soldier knew that peace was never permanent. It had to be defended, watched, and nourished, and so they continued visiting worlds torn by the conflict, meeting families, listening to fears, showing not just strength but presence. And slowly the galaxy began to breathe again. One night aboard the Starheart, Elias stood on the observation deck, watching a field of comets streak past, and Virexa joined him, silent for a long time, until she asked, "Do you regret saving me that day?" And he turned to her and smiled, faintly replying no, because in that 1 second, everything changed, not just for us, but for all of this, and she nodded, saying, "A life debt born in war became something else," and he added, "more than a debt," and the words hung there, simple but powerful, as if the stars themselves understood. And though war might rise again some day, in that moment, there was peace, not because they had fought, but because they had chosen to stand, not as queen and subject, not as alien and human, but as equals bonded by honor, sharpened by battle, and held together by something that no enemy could break.